Hello YouTube, and this is going to be the final part of Linux from scratch on this channel. We may do LFS in the future, however this is going to be the final part. So I have already verified that the kernel, the actual system boots, it does boot and it works correctly, except for the network configuration, which I will not be doing in this video because I'm rubbish at networking and there's some dump going on with the QEmu virtual network bridge thing that exists on the host machine. I'm not going to get into that. And to be honest, it's not that important because I have a booting system. Once you've got a booting system, you can faff around the configuration later. You've got a booting system. Now, I'm just going to first, we're just going to open up Brave again. And I straight up ended up not running this section of the book because it does not work with how I set it up. And I'm going to briefly go into why that is. And it's not the fault of the authors. It's basically the way I'm doing it is very different than the assumptions that this book makes. And I don't want to have to get into GPT partition stuff with Grub and possibly EFI and a load of other stuff. I just don't want to have to deal with that because I just don't care at this point. And it's just not relevant for what we're doing. Stuff we maybe get in later. We wanting to make a distribution. However, that's not what we're doing. We're trying to get a booting Linux from scratch system, which, by the way, is already running. But I'll go through what I did to get that actually running. So the first thing we need to do, though, is we need to actually get the file systems mounted and re-enter the chroot environment. So the easiest way to do that is to remount the LFS directory, which is I typoed that really, okay. And so we're just going to log in as root. I don't have root set up on here I don't have a root password set on here, so you can't actually become root without using sudo. I'm sure somebody will correct me about that, but this is what works. I'm not really bothered if there's a way of enabling it or not. This works. I don't care. And what we're going to do is we need to run grub install. And the first thing we need to do, however, is go back to this section, which is preparing a virtual file system. But before that, we need to go to set the LFS variable because this is now unset. And what you need to do, simply copy that, paste that in, make sure it's set correctly, which is echo LFS. And we set the UMask. That's done. Now we need to go and mount these virtual file systems again. The first one is simply this. If you do this without the LFS system, this variable set, your operating system starts doing weird things. It would close. I actually did this by accident a couple of times, and it closes Brave, and then you can't shut the system down. Things get messed up. So you need to make sure that LFS variable is set. Then it says mounting virtual kernel file systems. And I'm just going to copy and paste that. Done. And then I think this is something to do with tempfs. We did this in the previous video. Just running through it quickly. And then we enter the chroot. And we just copy and paste this again. All we need to do. Now, if we go back to chapter 10.4, we need to install Grub, or you would think, I should say, that you need to install Grub on dev bdb. So let's try doing that. bdb. What is it? 1. And it will complain about the file system. EX2 doesn't support embedding. Embedding is not possible. Grub can only be installed and set up using block lists. However, block lists are unreliable and the use is discouraged. Grub install error. This will not proceed. Will not proceed with block lists. So it's basically saying, look, I'm not going to install it. However, your stuff set up isn't correct. I have actually looked at exactly what this means when I was doing this basically this morning. And you can basically Google this error for a very complete explanation. Essentially, it doesn't work with how I got these disks set up. And I did actually say this when I was initially partitioning the disks. I've said there's going to be an issue with how these partitions are set up, because I think you need extra stuff with the newer with the GPT partitions and the EFI and all that other stuff. So I don't want to have to get into this. I don't want to have to repartition the disk. It's a faff. I could break the system. Blah blah blah. It's just not. It's something. It's something we could do in the future, maybe. Or if I was to do it again, then I'll probably take that into consideration. This isn't worth doing now. Just isn't worth doing. So I'm going to tell you what I did to get it booting. And it was actually really, I just used Debian's version of Grub. I just make this a little bit bigger. So if I do cat, actually let's just do vim, vim etc default Grub, and I'm not going to bother editing it because I've already made the changes. So there is this. This is usually commented out, and it's Grub disable OS prober. It says if your computer has multiple operating systems installed, then you probably want to run OS prober. So that's what I've. However, if your computer is a host for guest OSs installed via LVM or raw disk devices, running OS prober can cause damage to those guest OSs as it mounts file systems to look for things. We're not. I don't think we're doing that. So this is not applicable. So you just comment this out and make sure that's set to false. And if you just basically just save the file, and then you sudo update. Is it Grub? I think it is. Put in your password. And what this will do, it will run the Grub scripts. And it will say, warning, OS prober will be executed to detect other bootable partitions. Its output will be used to detect bootable binaries on them and create new boot entries. Found unknown Linux distribution on dev bdb1. Now, that means it found the Linux distribution and it's added the boot entry. So I can verify that myself by going into boot, grub, and then grub.cfg. And it will permission to deny me for some reason. I want to look at the file. So if we look in this file here, it might be just easier if we use vim. Don't save it, won't hurt. This is a Grub file. You do not edit this file, however, we're just going to have a look at it. And there's some functions and bits and pieces. So this is basically your Grub config. and there is like some setup for the Debian theme, blah 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 blah, and it's graphics mode, and this is your OS entry. So whenever you see an OS entry in the Grub menu before you load Linux, it says menu entry. This is basically what you would add manually in here. Now, that update Grub, it runs a bunch of scripts and it creates this file. Now, if we go down, we keep on scrolling down, get past GNU Linux, blah, 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 blah. Right. We get to begin etc grub d 30 OS progress. So what it's done is run this script, and what that script does, it goes and looks for other OSs. So if you had Windows on there, it will go and detect Windows and add in a boot option for Windows. Now it's unknown Linux distribution on dev VDB1, and now it has insmod part GPT, insmod ext2, search no floppy, blah blah blah, and that is it's set root. So it basically searches. It does a search. I'm not sure what that means. I'm sure if I could look up this is a command probably that you can find in the Grub manual. But it says set equals root. So it does a set root here, but I think it does a search through the disks and said, hey, go through the disks and try to find try to find this. So that's what that looks like it's doing. And then this is the UUID of this. Now, if I go back to my LFS, if I do BKLID, you'll notice VDB1 has UUID started with 914A0. So if I go back here, that's 914A0. So that is VDB1. And then it says boot the Linux part. Boot, it says Linux, boot, VM limits, and then it's the rest of the kernel version basically, with the LFS identifier in the file name, and then it's root equals dev VDB1. So we go back to here. We can just verify that this is correct, and that is VM Linux 6.13 blah blah LFS whatever. Right there, that's what that is. So this is correct. So that's what I did. That's essentially what I did to go and get this to boot. Just quit. So we're out of that. So the next thing, so that is, it should boot. However, and this, I'll probably blow this up when I edit the video. What you have to do is this is very small. You have to make sure all these disks are ticked, and the reason for that is that until the OS boots, it won't. The disk 2, which is where Linux is, won't exist. So it generated the Grub configurations correctly. What it did not do is when the virtual machine boots up, the disk doesn't exist because it's just not there yet. I don't know why QEmu does this. I tried searching for why it has this particular behavior. I wasn't sure why it was that. However, just ticking these, making sure these are all ticked works. What I suspect this does, because it says boot device order, it forces QEmu to mount the additional disks that are made when the machine boots, because they have to be considered for the boot order. It's a bit of a hack, but it works, which is what's important. So there's nothing else to do except for reboot, really. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do sudo reboot. And I'm just going to unfull screen my thing. Oh, I don't want it to build Debian. Jesus. Forgot about the timeout. So let's just reboot again. So it says unknown Linux distribution, dev vdb1, and we are booting. Now, if I go to here and I type root, and then I type the password, did I typo the password? I did. And there we go. We are in. Let's go to the root. There's not much installed, so there's not much to do. However, we've got a working Linux system. So I'm just going to reboot out of that for now. We verified we've got a working Linux system. There are still a couple of things to do. Now, I'm going to have to repeat some steps I had to do before. Let's just reboot. So we're going to reboot back into Debian. Just go back into here. Open up our web browser. We open up this. I'm just going to quickly go through this process again. So we're going to do the exactly same as before. Oh, we don't want to do that. I'm just being a bit lazy. So we mount the LFS partition. Let's clear the screen. We sudo su to become root. We run the LFS variable. We set the LFS variable. We set the umask. I don't even think this is probably necessary setting this umask, but let's just make sure we go through the correct process. And we mount and populate dev. So let's just make sure that this is there. Yep. And the file systems, virtual file systems to say, and then whatever this is, I can't remember. Some symbolic link stuff in all that. And then we enter the chroot. Because we got a couple of things to do in chapter 11 that are very short. So we've come to the end. And I'm just going to make this full screen, make it a little bit easier for myself. So the end, we're at the end. We finished chapter 10. We did cheat a little bit by not installing Grub, but that's because we couldn't. And the end. So it says, well done. The new LFS system is installed. We wish you much success with your shiny new custom-built Linux system. It may be a good idea to create an etc LFS release file. For having this file is very easy for you and for us if you need to ask for help at some point to find out which LFS version is installed in your system. Create this file by running. There we go. So we just basically put the version into there. Now, it says 2 files described in the install system may be used by packages that can be installed on the system layer, either in binary form or by building them. The first one shows the status of your new system with respect to the Linux standard space LSB. To create this file or run the following. So this is this goes and describes this distribution and release and your name here. So I should probably not put my name there. That'll do. The second one contains roughly the same information and is used by systemd and some other graphical desktop environments. To create this file, run this. Now, this is OS release. What did I put? I put dual code name to jankware LFS. So probably a quick way of doing this. I'll probably fat finger stuff in. Be sure to customize the fields, this code name and version code name. Or did I miss one? Oh, no. I've done that. That's fine. And next is just get counted and reboot the system. Now, we've already done that. Now, because I'll reboot the system, this happens when you reboot the computer anyway, so you don't really have to do any of this. And then we're up to the additional resources. So this is all about, I'm not going to go going over this. So one thing I will do though is I'll just see if I make the grub config now again, will it recognize the, where's the sudo update? So now because I've put in those etc release files, it now knows that it's Linux from scratch. So now that's done, if I do reboot, the sudo reboot, I could probably just do reboot, to be honest. Can I just do reboot? No, I need to do sudo reboot, okay. Actually, can't get to X. Very annoying, you can't actually, there we go. Right. I have to go into Debian for it to be able to, I'm not sure what that is. It's a peculiarity of the virtual machine. Let's just reboot again. And now it says Linux from scratch, 12.3 on DevBDB1. Okay, excellent. And then we boot it in. So that's the end of, we've got a boot in LFS. We've got all the right entries in Grub now. And other than the network configuration, which I know doesn't work, I did try pinging Google. I consider this done, and I might do an extra video doing a roundup and maybe a video talking about how to fix the network configuration, which shouldn't be too difficult, or hopefully won't be too difficult. But I think that's very specific to the QEmu environment I'm running this in. So I don't think this is going to be relevant to a lot of people, so I'm going to have that as a separate video. However, that is Linux from scratch. We do have a boot Linux system that we have built from source code. So I'm really pleased with that. I was pleasantly surprised when it just all booted, other than some faffing with the virtual machine settings. And I think that's the end of this series for now. I'm going to decide whether I want to do BLFS, and I'll start blathering now, and I'll say bye-bye, and hopefully I'll see you in future videos. So bye-bye.